unreeled. Vintage recordings of fiction recovered from discontinued physical media.
Five Go to Demon's Rocks by Enid Blyton. Part 1. "Fanny!" shouted Mr. Kiran, running up the stairs with a letter in his hand. "Fanny, where are you?" "Here, dear, helping Joan with the dusting," said Mrs. Kiran, appearing out of a bedroom. "What's the matter?" "I've a letter here from Professor Hayling," said Mr. Kiran. "You remember him, don't you?" "Do you mean the man who came to stay a few years ago and kept forgetting to come in for meals?" said Mrs. Kiran. "Yes," said her husband. "He's coming to stay today for a week instead of next week." "But he can't do that," cried Mrs. Kiran. "George is coming home today with her 3 cousins. "Oh, I'd forgotten," said Mr. Kiran. "Well, ring up and tell George to stay where she is. We can't have them while Professor Hayling is here. I shall want to be quite undisturbed. He and I have to confer about some new invention of his." "You knew today was the day the children were due home," said Mrs. Kiran. "Quentin, you must ring up your professor friend and say he can't come." "Very well, my dear, very well," said Mr. Kiran, "but he won't like it." He went off to his study to use the telephone, and Mrs. Kiran hurried up the stairs to get the rooms ready for the 4 cousins. "Anne can sleep with George as usual," she said to Joan, "and the 2 boys can sleep in the guest room." "Well, it would be nice to have all the 5 back again," said Joan. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Kiran, "there's Mr. Kiran calling me." "All right, dear, I'm coming, I'm coming." She ran downstairs to the hall and into the study. Mr. Kiran was standing there holding the telephone receiver. "What shall I do?" he almost shouted. "Professor Hayling has left and is already on his way here, and he's bringing his son with him, so there'll be 2 of them." "Well, really," said Mrs. Kiran, "there isn't room for them here with the 4 cousins as well, Quentin." "Well, ring up George and tell her not to come back for a week, but to stay with her cousins," said Mr. Kiran. "But, Quentin, you know perfectly well that George's aunt and uncle are shutting up the house today and going on a cruise somewhere," said Mrs. Kiran. "Oh dear. Well, I'll ring up and try to stop them all coming." So once more the telephone was used, and Mrs. Kiran tried anxiously to get in touch with George. For a long time nobody answered, and then at last a voice said, "Hello? Mrs. Kiran here. May I speak to George, please?" "Oh, I'm sorry, all the 5 have already left on their bicycles," said the voice, "and the house is empty except for me. I'm a neighbour, come in to lock everything up." "Oh, thank you," said Mrs. Kiran, and she put back the receiver. She gave a hearty sigh. Now what was to be done? "Quentin," she said, going into the study where her husband was tidying up an enormous pile of papers, "George and all the others are on their way here, and how I'm going to put everyone up I do not know. There's only—" She stopped very suddenly and gazed through the study window in horror. Then she pointed and said, "Look! What's that at the window?" Her husband turned and stared in amazement. "It looks like a monkey," he said. "Where on earth did it come from?" A voice called down the stairs. It was Joan. "Ma'am, there's a car at the door. I think it's the master's visitors, a man and a boy." "Don't tell me that your friend owns a monkey," groaned poor Mrs. Kiran, "and has brought him to stay too." She jumped as a loud bang came from the front door and went to open it. There stood Professor Hayling, and by him was a boy of about 9, with a face a little like that of the monkey now on his shoulder. The professor strode in, calling to the chauffeur behind him. "Bring the luggage in, will you?" "Hello, Mrs. Kiran, nice to see you again." "Ah, Quentin, there you are." "My dear old friend," said Mr. Kiran, shaking hands warmly. "Fine to see you. So glad you could come." "This is Tinker, my son," said Professor Hayling, clapping the boy on the back. "I always forget what his real name is. We call him Tinker because he's always tinkering with cars, mad on them, you know." Poor Mrs. Kiran hadn't been able to get in a word. The Professor was now in the hall still talking. The monkey had leapt off the boy's shoulder and was on the hall stand swinging on a hat peg. Somehow or other the visitors were pushed into the living room and they sat down. "Joan," said Mrs. Kiran, "will you take the bags up to the guest room and make up a bed there on the couch for the little boy?" "What about the monkey?" asked Joan, eyeing it warily. "Is he to have a bed too?" "He sleeps with me," said Tinker. He leapt suddenly up the stairs, making a most extraordinary purring noise as he went. Mrs. Kiran stared after him in amazement. "Is he in pain or something?" she asked. No, he's just being a car," said his father. "I told you he was mad about cars. He can't help pretending to be one now and again." "I'm a car, a Jaguar car," yelled Tinker from the top of the stairs. "Can you hear my engine? Brum, brum, brum. Hey, Mischief, come and have a ride." The little monkey scampered up the stairs and leapt onto the boy's shoulder, chattering in a funny little voice. The Jaguar car then apparently made a tour of all the bedrooms, occasionally giving a very loud honk. "Does your boy always behave like that?" asked Mr. Kiran, amazed. "How do you manage to do any work?" "Oh, I have a soundproof workroom in my garden," said the Professor. "I hope your workroom is soundproof too." "No, it isn't," said Mr. Kiran. He shut the study door after the Professor, but no door could shut out the sound of the small boy honking upstairs. George and her 3 cousins were already on their way back to Kiran. They cycled along the lanes with Timmy, George's dog, loping easily beside them. They were all glad to see the little blue bay and to catch sight of Kiran Island lying there peacefully in the sun. They rode up to the back gate of Kiran Cottage and leapt off their bicycles. They put them into the shed and George gave a shout. "Mother! We're home! Where are you?" She had hardly finished yelling when Anne suddenly clutched her arm. "George, what's that? Look, peeping out of the window there." They all looked, and George shouted back in astonishment, "It's a monkey!" "No, Timmy, no! Come back! Timmy!" But Timmy too had seen the quaint little face peering out of the window and had shot off to investigate. He barked at the top of his voice as he galloped indoors and almost knocked over a small boy there. The monkey, terrified, at once leapt onto the picture rail that ran round the room. "You leave my monkey alone, you big bully!" cried a furious voice, and through the open door George saw the small boy give Timmy a sharp smack. She raced indoors and glared at him angrily. "How dare you hit my dog?" she said. "And what's that creature doing up there?" The little monkey was terrified. It sat clinging to the picture rail, trembling and making a piteous chattering noise. Julian came in just as Joan the cook arrived from upstairs. "What's all this?" she said. "You'll have your father racing out of his study in a minute, George. Stop barking at the little monkey, Timmy, for goodness sake, and stop crying, Tinker, and take your monkey away." "I'm not crying," said Tinker fiercely, rubbing his eyes. "Come here, Mischief. I won't let that big dog hurt you." "You take your monkey away, old son," said Julian gently, thinking that the small boy was very brave to imagine he could fight old Timmy. "Run along." Tinker made a clicking sound, and the monkey dropped at once to his shoulder and nuzzled there. "Oh, poor little mite," said Anne. "Timmy, don't frighten it again. You mustn't bully tiny things." "Timmy never bullies anything," said George at once, frowning at Anne. "But after all, what do you expect him to do when he comes home and finds a strange boy and a monkey here? Who are you, boy?" "I shan't tell you," said Tinker, and marched out of the room, the monkey still whimpering into his neck. "I thought you wouldn't like it," said Joan. "It's that professor friend of your father's, George, the one who is coming to stay next week. He telephoned this morning to say he was coming this week instead, and bringing his boy as well. He didn't say anything about a monkey, though. They arrived before anything could be done to stop them. Your mother and I are at our wits' end to know where to put you all. The boy and his father are sharing the guest room." "But that's where Julian and Dick are going to sleep," said George. "Oh, we'll manage somehow," said Julian. "We can't go back home because our house will be all shut up now." "You could sleep up in the loft," said Joan, sounding rather doubtful, "but it's very dusty and terribly draughty. I could put a couple of mattresses up there for you." "All right," said Julian. "Thanks, Joan." "Was Aunt Fanny? Does she mind all this?" "Well," said Joan, "you know what your aunt is like. Always so kind, never thinks of herself." The kitchen door swung open, and George's mother came in. "Hello, dears," she said, smiling. "I thought I heard Timmy barking." "Mother," said George, "how could you take people in when you knew we were coming home today?" "That's enough, George," said Julian, who saw how worried his aunt looked. "Aunt Fanny, we won't be any trouble. We'll keep out of the house as much as we can. We'll sleep in the loft, the girls will help with the housework, and Dick and I will do the odd jobs." Suddenly Timmy went to the half-open door and barked. He could smell that monkey again. He heard a high chattering noise, and he pushed the door open at once. Was that monkey calling him rude names? He saw the little creature sitting on the top of the rail at the foot of the stairs. It saw Timmy and danced up and down, sounding as if it were laughing. Timmy raced to the rail and leapt up, barking fiercely. The study door flew open, and out marched not one angry professor, but two. "What's all this noise? Can't we have a moment's peace?" "Oh dear," said Mrs. Kiran, foreseeing this kind of thing happening 20 times a day, now that Timmy and the others were here. She shushed the two angry men. "Timmy just isn't used to the monkey yet," she said. "Go back, please, and shut the door. I'll see you aren't disturbed again." Julian and Dick set to work to take a couple of old mattresses up to the loft, and some rugs and 2 cushions for pillows. George was very sulky. "Cheer up, for goodness sake," said Dick. "It's worse for your mother than it is for any of us. She's going to be very busy this week." She certainly was. Meals for 9 people, 5 of them very hungry children, were not easy to provide. Joan did an enormous amount of cooking, the girls helped with the housework, and the boys cycled off to Kiran village in the mornings to do the shopping. "Why can't that boy Tinker help?" demanded George on the second day they were home. "What on earth does he think he's doing now? Look at him, rushing all round, making a frightful noise. Tinker, shut up! You'll disturb your father and mine." "You shut up yourself," called back Tinker rudely. "Can't you see I'm a Bentley car, with a very powerful engine? And listen to this horn. Marvellous." He gave a remarkably good imitation of a powerful car horn. The Bentley purred out of the kitchen and went to look for passengers. Mischief scampered and ran up Tinker's body to his shoulder. "You're my passenger," said Tinker, and Mischief held on to his hair as he rushed out into the garden at top speed. It began to rain next day, and Tinker couldn't go out. He nearly drove everyone mad, rushing about all over the house, hooting and purring like a car engine. "Now look," said Joan to him, when for the 20th time he drove himself all round her kitchen. "You just keep out of my way." "Look at Mischief," said Tinker. "He's helping himself to apples in the larder, but you don't say anything to him." "Oh, land's sake, is that creature in the larder again?" cried poor Joan, rushing across the kitchen. "Don't you like him?" asked Tinker. "He likes you." Joan glanced across at the tiny monkey. He sat huddled in a corner, his arms folded over his face, looking very small and sad. One small brown eye peeped out at Joan. "You're a humbug, you are," she said, "looking as if you're the unhappiest monkey in the world, when all the time you're thinking what mischief to get up to next. Here, come and get this biscuit, you rascal, and don't you dare go near Timmy this morning." Mischief crept up cautiously to Joan, eyeing the biscuit she held. He had had 1 or 2 slaps from her for stealing, and he was rather wary of her quick right hand. "Here you are. Take the biscuit for goodness sake," she said, "and don't look such a little misery." The monkey snatched the biscuit with one of his tiny paws and scampered away to the door. It was shut, so Tinker opened it for him. At once Timmy came in. Mischief still held the biscuit, and then to Joan's enormous surprise he held it out to Timmy. He chattered in a very small voice, and Timmy listened gravely. Then the big dog gently took the biscuit, chewed it once and swallowed it. "Well, did you ever see anything like that before?" said Joan, marvelling. "Whatever will George say when she hears?" Timmy put his big head forward and gave the monkey a sudden lick on the tip of his funny little nose. "Timmy's saying thank you," cried Tinker in delight. "Now they'll be friends, you see if they won't." Joan was astonished and pleased. She went upstairs to find George and tell her. George went down with Joan, curious to see if the 2 animals were becoming friendly, and she saw a very strange sight indeed. Mischief was on Timmy's back, and Timmy was solemnly trotting round the kitchen giving him a ride. The monkey was chattering in delight, and Tinker was shouting in glee. The monkey suddenly leaned forward and hugged Timmy round the neck. Then he slid off. Timmy lay down on the rug. At once Mischief settled himself between Timmy's big front paws, cuddling there without fear. Timmy bent his head and licked him very gently. Tinker had been watching from a corner of the kitchen, saying nothing. He was rather afraid of George and her quick temper. He was delighted when he saw her go over and pat Timmy, without even disturbing the monkey. In his joy, he began to honk like a lorry, and he startled everyone so much that they yelled at him. "Stop it, Tinker!" cried Joan. "You'll have Mr. Kirin in here if you honk like that. Can't you be something quiet for a change? A bicycle, for instance." Tinker thought that was quite a good idea. He ran round the kitchen and out into the hall, making a hissing noise, like the sound of a bicycle's wheels on the road. Then he decided to make a noise like a bicycle bell, and produced a very loud ringing noise indeed. The study door flew open, and out came Mr. Kirin and Tinker's father. Poor Tinker was caught, and his father shook him so hard that 2 pencils shot out of his pocket and rolled over the floor. Tinker began to yell, and how he could yell! George came out of the kitchen to see what was happening, and Dick, Julian and Anne raced down the stairs. Joan rushed out into the hall too, and almost sent Mr. Kirin flying. Then George did a very silly thing. She began to laugh. "This is absolutely the last straw," shouted Mr. Kirin, his face red with rage. "I won't have it. Don't you know that very important work is going on here in Kirin Cottage? Fanny, send these children away somewhere. I won't have them in the house disturbing us. Send them away." He and the Professor stalked back to the study and banged the door. Mrs. Kirin had appeared during the row, and she sighed when she heard her husband shouting. "Come into the living room, George," she said, "and bring the others with you. We'll have to decide what can be done. Your father really is doing wonderful work, you know, and I must say that Tinker and Mischief and Timmy don't help very much." She took the 5 children and Timmy into the living room. The monkey, scared at the shouting, had gone into hiding and was nowhere to be seen. They all sat down, looking rather solemn. George spoke first, most indignantly. "Mother, this is our home. Why do we have to go away just because father wants this scientist friend to stay with him?" "That will do, George," said her mother. "You ought to understand your father better than you seem to. You are both exactly the same. Impatient, short-tempered, bangers of doors. Now, let's see if we can find a way out." "I only wish we could stay at my home," said Julian, feeling awkward. "But it's all shut up now that my parents have gone away." "Can't we take tents over to Kirin Island?" said George. "The forecast for the weather is very bad," said her mother. "Rain, rain, nothing but rain. You can't possibly go and camp in the pouring rain and row to and fro getting drenched every day." There was a silence. What a problem! Then suddenly Tinker spoke up. "I know where we could go," he said. "Oh," said George, "where?" "Well, I was thinking of my lighthouse," said Tinker. And then, as no one said anything but merely stared at him in astonishment, he nodded at them. "I said my lighthouse. Don't you know what a lighthouse is?" "But Tinker, dear, you can't possibly own a lighthouse," said Mrs. Kirin, smiling. "Well, I do," said Tinker quite fiercely. "You see, my father had some very special work to do that couldn't be done on land, so he bought an old empty lighthouse and did his work there. I went to stay with him." "But surely he didn't give it to you, did he?" said Julian disbelievingly. "Yes, he did." "Why shouldn't he?" demanded Tinker. "He didn't want it any more, and nobody would buy it, so he gave it to me on my last birthday." "Well, I'm blessed," said Julian. George's eyes shone as she looked at the surprising Tinker. "A lighthouse of your very own? Where is it?" she asked. "About 10 miles along this coast to the west," said Tinker. "It's not an awfully big one, you know, but it's smashing. The old lamp is still there, but it's not used now." "Why not?" asked Dick. "Well, because a new lighthouse was built farther along the coast, in a better position for warning ships," explained Tinker. "That's how it was this old one was put up for sale. Do let's all go and stay in it till our 2 fathers have finished their work. We could take Timmy and Mischief too. There's plenty of room." This proposal was so astonishing that no one answered for a few minutes. Then George gave him a friendly dig in the chest. "I'll come. Fancy, living in a lighthouse," she said. "Aunt Fanny, may we go?" said Anne, her eyes shining too. "Well, I don't know," said her aunt. "It really is a most extraordinary idea. I shall have to discuss it with your uncle and with Tinker's father." "My father will say yes, I know he will," said Tinker. "We left some stores there and some blankets." The idea certainly appealed to all the 5. Even Timmy thumped his tail on the floor as if he had understood every word. "I've a map that shows where my lighthouse is," said Tinker, scrabbling in one of his pockets. "Look, here's a map of the coastline, and just there, built on the rocks, is my lighthouse." Everyone pored over the grubby map. Nobody had the least doubt that this was the answer to all their problems. "The rocks that the lighthouse is built on used to wreck many ships," said Tinker. "Wreckers used to work along that coast, you know. They would shine a light as if to guide ships along the coast and make them go to the rocks. They'd be broken to pieces and everyone drowned. And the wreckers would wait till the ship was washed up on the shore and then take everything they could from her. There's a wrecker's cave there too, where the wreckers stored the things they stole from the wrecked ships." "Well, dear," said Mrs. Kiran, "I really don't see any reason why you shouldn't go to Tinker's lighthouse, if his father agrees." She thought that she might as well go immediately to the study and speak to her husband and Tinker's father. She knocked discreetly at the closed door. "Come in," said an irritable voice. She opened the study door and went inside. "What is it now?" said Mr. Kiran impatiently. "Quentin," said Mrs. Kiran, "I have something to say. Tinker says his father gave him a lighthouse for his own, and he suggests that he and the others should leave here and go and stay there." "That little monster says he owns a lighthouse," said Mr. Kiran, "and you believe him?" "Tinker's quite right, as it happens," said Professor Hayling. "I bought a lighthouse to work in when I wanted to get right away from everything and concentrate, and when I'd finished I couldn't sell it, so, as Tinker pestered me for it, I gave it to him." "Professor Hayling," said Mrs. Kiran, "is the lighthouse fit for the 5 to stay in? And if so, they want to know if they can go there until you two have finished your work here. They're a nuisance to you, and to be quite honest, you're a nuisance to them." "Well," said Professor Hayling, "I see no reason—" "Yes," interrupted Mr. Kiran, "yes, yes, yes. Let them go to the lighthouse, or the Tower of London, or the Zoo, if you like. Anywhere out of this house." And so it was all settled. "When shall we go?" asked Dick. "Well, why not tomorrow morning?" said Julian. "I'm sure everyone would be glad if we left as soon as possible. We'll see about a car and someone to drive us, and then we'll pack and make our getaway." And so they all set off to the garage in the village. The man at the garage listened to Julian's tale of wanting a car to go to the lighthouse. "It's the old lighthouse at Demon's Rocks," said Julian. "We're going to stay there." "Stay at a lighthouse?" said the man. "This isn't a joke, is it?" "No, it happens to belong to one of us," said Julian. "We have a few things to take there, of course, and we hoped you'd have a car and a driver tomorrow for us. We'd let you know somehow when we're ready to come back, and you can send the same car for us then." "Right," said the man. "And you're staying at Kiran Cottage now, you say?" "Oh, your uncle is Mr. Kiran. Well, I know Master George here, of course, but I wasn't certain who you were." George was pleased to be called Master George. It was nice to be thought a boy. "We'd better take a few rugs and cushions," said Julian, "and some sweaters and wind cheaters. I can't imagine it's very warm in the lighthouse." "There's an oil heater there," said Tinker. "I think it was for the lighthouse lamp when it was in use." "What sort of stores did you and your father leave there?" asked Dick. "Well, there's plenty of tin food, I think," said Tinker, trying to remember. "We left it there in case my father wanted to come back at any time and work again in peace and quiet." They went to the grocer's, and Anne tried her best to order what else she thought they would need outside of tinned food. "Don't forget, we can go shopping in Demon's Rocks village," said Tinker, "only it's a bit of a nuisance if there's windy weather. The path over the rocks isn't very safe then. We might have to stay in the lighthouse for a day or two without leaving it. Even a boat might be too risky." "Get some biscuits, Anne," said George, "and bars of chocolate, and lots of ginger beer, and a big bottle of lemonade." "We'll have it all sent to the garage," said Julian, "and then put in the car ready to take away tomorrow." Next morning George awoke first. She woke Anne and said, "Lighthouse Day! Buck up, it's 7:30. There was great excitement after breakfast. Rugs and coats were packed, and nightclothes, the warmest they could find, and tins of cakes and mince pies, sandwiches to eat on the way, books and games. As George said, anyone would think they were going away for a month. "The car's late," said Dick impatiently, "or else my watch is fast." "Here it comes," said Anne excitedly. The car came up to the front gate of Kiran Cottage, and the driver blew his horn, making Mr. Kiran almost jump out of his skin. He turned on poor Tinker at once. "Was that you up to your silly tricks again, pretending to be a car and hooting?" "No, sir, it wasn't, on my honour it wasn't," said Tinker. "I'll just ask the driver what he means by driving up here and hooting fit to scare us all," said Mr. Kiran. "What's he come here for, anyway?" "Father, it's the car that's come to take us to the lighthouse," said George, not knowing whether to laugh or be cross. "Lighthouse?" said Mr. Kiran. "Oh, yes. Well, why didn't you tell me before? Goodbye, then. Have a good time, and don't forget to dry yourselves well after a bathe." They piled into the car, and the man put their luggage into the big boot. Then the car turned and drove away down the sandy lane. "We're off," said George in a happy voice. "All by ourselves again. It's the thing I like best of all." Part 2. They stopped for an early lunch and ate their sandwiches hungrily, sitting on a cliff. "We'll be there in half an hour," said the driver. "Where are you staying at Demon's Rocks? The garage didn't tell me." "At the lighthouse," said Julian. "Do you know it?" "Yes, but people don't stay there," said the driver, thinking that Julian was pulling his leg. "What hotel are you going to, or are you staying with friends?" "No, we really are going to the lighthouse," said Tinker. "It's mine, my very own." "Well, you've certainly got a place with a fine view," said the driver. "I was born at Demon's Rocks. My old granddad is still there in the same cottage where I was born. You ought to look him up and get him to tell you his tales. He might even show you the Wrecker's Cave." "Oh, we heard about that," said George. "Is it really true? Can we see it? And is there someone in there still?" "No, all the old wreckers are gone long ago," said the driver. "As soon as the new lighthouse was built, the wreckers' day was done. It's so powerful, you see. Its beams can be seen even in the fiercest storm. The beam from the lighthouse you're going to wasn't very good, but it saved a good many ships all the same." "What's your granddad's name?" asked George. "Jeremiah Boogle," said the driver. "You'll find him sitting somewhere on the quay, smoking a long pipe and scowling at anyone that comes near him. But he likes children, so don't you be afraid of his scowl." After lunch they continued on their journey and descended the other side of the hill. The car swept down almost to the edge of the sea. The lighthouse was now plainly to be seen, a good way out from the shore. A small boat bobbed at a stone jetty, and Tinker pointed it out. "That's the boat we had, the one that took us to and from the lighthouse when the tide was in. It's called Bob-About, and my word, it does bob about too." "Is it yours?" asked George. "Well, it was sold with the lighthouse, so I suppose it is," said Tinker. "See you don't get storm-bound in the lighthouse," said the driver. "The sea between Demon's Rocks and the jetty will be too rough for that little boat in stormy weather." The driver brought the car to a stop. "Are you going to go straight to the lighthouse?" he asked. "Shall I help you carry your things to the boat?" "Thanks," said Julian, and between them they carried everything down to the jetty. An old man sat nearby, and he touched his cap to them. "Message came through from Kiran to say I was to get the old boat out for you," he said. "Which of you's Master Hayling?" "I am," said Tinker. "Come on, everyone, let's row to the lighthouse. I can hardly wait to get there." The 5 children jumped down into the boat. Timmy leapt in after George, but Mischief cried in terror when Tinker took him into the bobbing boat and sat down, holding him firmly. "It's all right, Mischief," said Tinker. "Don't you remember this little boat of mine? You never did like going in a boat, though, did you?" There were 2 pairs of oars. Julian took one pair and Dick took the other. "Are you going to row right over the rocks?" asked Anne, peering down into the water. "They're covered now, but how horrible they look just beneath the boat." Yes, I bet they ripped up many a poor ship in the old days, said Julian. No wonder they called them Demon's Rocks. The lighthouse came nearer and nearer, and they looked at it excitedly. It was sturdily built and seemed very tall. Its base was firmly embedded in the rocks below it. They thought that the foundations must go very deep down into the rocks to hold the lighthouse firmly in the great gales that must blow up in bad weather. A gallery, rather like a veranda, ran round the top, just below the windows through which the lighthouse lamp one shone. They came nearer and saw that the lighthouse had stone steps running from the rocks up to a doorway built some way above the crashing waves. "Will the door be locked?" asked Dick suddenly. "I wouldn't want to row all this way and then find we can't get into the place." "Of course the door will be locked," said Tinker. "Here's the key. Dad gave it to me, and I always carry it about with me. It's very precious." The lighthouse was now towering above them. "You'd better be a bit careful now," said Tinker. "Wait till a big wave swells up, then ride over it, and make for that rock over there, the one standing out in the water. There's a calm bit beyond it, and you can row up to the steps quite safely. Look out for a stone post there, and chuck the rope round it, George. You're in a better position than I am for that." It was all done much more easily than the five had hoped. The boat swung into a stretch of fairly calm water, and the two boys rowed hard for the steps. George neatly threw the loop of rope over the post, and there they were, at the foot of the lighthouse, with only a few rocks to climb over to reach the steps. One by one the children and Timmy jumped out and stared up at the lighthouse. It seemed even bigger now that they were just at the bottom. "I'll unlock the door," said Tinker proudly, and he climbed up the steep stone steps. He thrust the key into the lock and opened the door. Julian pushed the others in, out of the wind and spray, and shut the door firmly. "Well, here we are," he said. "Isn't it dark? Good thing I brought a torch." He shone the torch round, but all that was to be seen was a steep iron staircase spiralling up the middle of the lighthouse. "The staircase goes right up to the top, to the lamp-room," explained Tinker. "It passes through a few rooms on the way. I'll show you." He led the way up the steep little staircase. They came to a hole through which the stairway passed into a little dark room. "One of the storerooms," said Tinker, and flashed his torch round. "See, there are the tins of food that my father left here. Now we go on up to the oil room, where tins of paraffin oil used to be kept, the oil they used for the lamp at the top of the lighthouse. The old lamp had to burn oil, you see. They didn't have electricity in those days. Here it is." The oil room had a very low ceiling and was packed with old tins. The next room had one of the few little windows in the lighthouse, and as the sun came through it, it was much lighter and more cheerful. "This was where my father and I slept," said Tinker. "Look, we forgot to take that old mattress away with us. What a bit of luck! We can use it." Up the spiral staircase they went once more, and this time they came to a room with a much higher ceiling than the others, and a good window, though small. It had a table and 3 chairs and a box. It also had an old desk and a little paraffin stove for boiling water or frying food. "There's my old frying pan," said Tinker. "We'll find that jolly useful, and a kettle and a saucepan, and we left spoons and forks and knives behind." "Where's the water tank?" asked George. "We'll have to have some water." "My father arranged a catch tank to the west of the lighthouse," said Tinker proudly. "It catches rainwater and runs into a pipe that goes through one of the windows and fills a little tank over a sink. I forgot to show you that. There's a tap to turn the water on and off." "And what's the next room?" asked Julian. "There's only one more, and that's the lamp room. I'll show you. It used to be the most important room in the place, but now it's never used. Come and see." Once more they all climbed up the spiral stairway. The lamp-room was a high room with big windows all round it. It was very bright, for the sun shone steadily into it. The view was magnificent. Anne gave a shout of wonder. The lighthouse was so high that the children could see for miles and miles over the heaving dark blue sea. They went all round the lamp-room, looking in every direction. "I say, there's a door there," cried Dick. "Does it open onto that little balcony or gallery or whatever it is that runs all round this room?" "Yes," said Tinker. "The gallery goes completely round the lamp-room, but you can't go out there except in calm weather. You might be blown right off. You've no idea what it's like when there's a storm." "This lamp is never lighted now, is it?" asked George. "No," said Tinker. "I told you, there's a fine new lighthouse a bit further down the coast. It has a terrific lamp run by electricity. We shall see its beams sweeping the sea at night." "Anyone feel hungry?" said Anne. "I feel jolly empty." "Oh, gosh, we haven't taken the things out of my boat," said Tinker. "Come on, let's carry them all indoors and have a meal." They ran down the spiral stairway, through room after room, and came to the great door. Julian pulled it open. The wind rushed in and almost knocked him over. They pushed their way out and climbed back over the rocks to where they had left the boat. It was bobbing gently up and down in the little stretch of calm water. "I'll take half the heavy things, Julian," said Dick, "and you take the rest. The girls and Tinker can manage the smaller things." "The boat will be quite all right here," said Tinker. "Unless the sea gets terribly rough, then we'll have to pull it halfway up the steps." They unloaded the boat and put some of the things into the bedroom and some into the living room. Tinker popped a saucepan of water on the stove to boil. Because of the rainy weather, the little rain-catch tank had provided plenty of water for the small inside tank set over the sink, which was most conveniently put in the living room. Eggs were put into the saucepan and were soon boiled. "George, you cut some bread and butter," said Anne. "The bread's in that bag, but goodness knows where the butter is. I know we brought some." "What about having a few of Joan's famous mince pies too?" said Dick, taking the lid off a big square tin. "Phew, dozens, and cherry buns as well." It was a very pleasant and cheery meal that the five had in the old lighthouse. The gulls called outside, the wind gave the lighthouse an occasional buffet, and the sound of the sea was mixed with all the other noises. When the meal was over, Julian said, "Come on, let's unpack and arrange everything. Girls, you'd better sleep here in this living room, and we three boys will sleep down in the bedroom. That all right by you, Tinker?" "Fine, so long as you don't mind Mischief sleeping with us," said Tinker. They all had fun unpacking and putting the things in different places. "Storeroom for that," Julian said, "and living room for this, and bedroom for these rugs. These two had better go to the living room because the girls will be sleeping there." "Cards for the living room," said Dick, handing them to Anne, "and books and papers. Now then, what about a game of cards?" Nobody could beat Julian that night. Luck went his way all the time. At the end of the 5th game, Anne yawned loudly. "Oh, sorry," she said. "Don't think I'm bored. That yawn came too suddenly for me to stop it." "Well, I feel decidedly yawny too," said Dick. "What about a snack or something, and then we'll go to bed? We had such an enormous tea that I feel I can't manage another full meal, but a chocolate biscuit or two would be quite welcome." They ate with enjoyment, feeling lazy and comfortable. "And now to bed," said Julian. Before a quarter of an hour had passed, everyone was bedded down comfortably. The 3 boys curled up in rugs in the bedroom below, with Mischief cuddled up into Tinker's neck. The 2 girls and Timmy lay on a mattress with a blanket over them. Soon they were all asleep. Outside, the sea sighed and splashed and swirled, and the wind cried like the daytime gulls. But all was peace and quiet inside the old lighthouse. Not even Mischief, the monkey, stirred in his sleep. It was fun to wake up in the morning and hear the gulls screaming around, fun to have breakfast of eggs and bread and butter and apples to crunch afterwards, and fun to plan what to do that day. "I vote we do a bit of shopping and buy some more eggs and fresh bread and a bottle or 2 of creamy milk," said Anne. "And we might try and find that car driver's granddad and ask him a few things about the lighthouse and the wreckers that came in the old days," said Dick. "Yes, and he might show us the wreckers' cave," said Julian. "I'd like to see that. We'll go over the rocks to the jetty. The tide should be out now, so we ought to be able to walk over." "Well, we must be back before the tide comes in," said Tinker, "because if we leave the boat tied up here by the lighthouse, we shan't be able to get back once the sea sweeps over the rocks and cuts us off." The little party set off over the rocks that at low tide lay between the lighthouse and the shore. Soon the children were on the little stone jetty. "What was the name of old Grandad?" said Dick. "Jeremiah Bogle," said Anne, "and he smokes a long pipe and scowls at people." "Well, he should be easy to find," said Julian. "Come on, he's probably somewhere on the quay." "There he is," said George, spotting an old man with a long pipe in his mouth. "That's Jeremiah, I'm sure." Yes, there he was, sitting with his legs stretched out in front of him, an old, old man, smoking a very long pipe. He had a fine beard, a yachting cap askew on his head, and such enormous shaggy eyebrows that it was difficult to see his eyes beneath them. The five went up to him, with Timmy trotting behind and Mischief on Tinker's shoulder. The old man spotted Mischief at once. "Well, well, the monkey," he said. "Many's the little monkey I've brought home from my voyages." He snapped his fingers and made a curious noise in his throat. Mischief stared at him, listening. Then he leapt from Tinker's shoulders onto the old man's and rubbed his head against the old sailor's hairy ear. "Mischief," said Tinker, amazed. "Look at that, George. He never goes to a stranger." "All monkeys like me, and I like them," said the old sailor, laughing and scratching Mischief's neck. "Are you Mr. Jeremiah Bogle?" asked Julian. "That's me," said the old fellow. "How do you know my name?" "Well, Jackson, the car driver, told us he was your grandson," said Julian. "You see, we're staying at the old lighthouse, and Jackson said you could tell us a few things about it, and about the wreckers that lived here before the lighthouse was built." "Oh, I can tell you tales all right," said Jeremiah, puffing out a cloud of smoke and making Mischief cough. "I knew some wreckers once myself. Once there was One-Ear Bill, now—" And then old Jeremiah told a story that the five could hardly believe. "Now, when I were a boy," began the old man, "there wasn't no lighthouse out there, but there was always them wicked rocks, and many's the time in a stormy season when ships have been caught by their teeth a glittering there, waiting. You know what they're called, don't you?" "Yes, Demon's Rocks," said Tinker. "Well, up on that high cliff there lived a wicked old man," said Jeremiah, "and he had a son as bad as himself, and a nephew too. The three wreckers they was called. Mean and cruel and wicked they were, and everyone was scared of them. There was One-Ear, the old man. They say his left ear was chewed off by a monkey, but do I blame that monkey? No, I do not. And there was Nosy, the son, and Bart, his nephew, and not a pin to choose between them for meanness. There was only one thing they was after, and that was money, and a mighty wicked way they chose to get it. I'll tell you how they got rich. You see that high cliff away down the coast there, the one with the flag post and the flag a-waving in the wind? Now, ships mustn't hug the coast beyond that point. If they do, they'll be forced inland by the current and thrown on them rocks down there, Demon's Rocks, and that's the end of them. No ship has ever been able to escape the sharp teeth of them wicked rocks once she's caught in that current. Well now, to stop the ships going near the cliff in those days, they flew a flag in the daytime and lighted a lamp up there at night, and both said as plain as could be, 'Beware, danger, keep out.' Of course all sailors knew the flag and the lamp, and many a one blessed them, and took their ships out to sea, away from Demon's Rocks. But that didn't suit old One-Ear Bill. He didn't mind a wreck or two. He'd be down on the beach picking up what he could, if a ship came smashing down on the rocks, and would he save a single soul? Not he. Well, the wrecks didn't come often enough for him and Nosy and Bart, so they put their ugly heads together and thought up as wicked a plan as any man could think of. On a stormy night they put out the lamp a-shining brightly on the far cliff, and carried it to that bit of cliff over yonder. And you know what's just below that cliff, don't you? All round the lighthouse." "The Demon's Rocks," said George, horrified. "Do you mean to say that One-Ear Bill and the others deliberately shone the lamp there on stormy nights to guide ships straight onto the rocks?" said Julian. "Aye, that's what I do mean," said Jeremiah. "And what's more, I met old One-Ear Bill myself one dark night when the storms were on, and what was he carrying between himself and Nosy? The lamp. They doused the light, of course, but I'd my own little lantern with me, and I saw the lamp plain enough, and when they saw me they set Bart on to me, to push me over the cliff so as I wouldn't tell on them. But I got away, and I did tell on them, and One-Ear Bill went to prison and serve him right, the wicked man. But he didn't care, and why should he? He was rich." "But how was he rich?" asked Dick. "Well, young sir, the ships that came sailing round this coast in those days came from far-off countries, and many of them carried treasure," said Jeremiah, "and One-Ear Bill stole so much gold and silver and pearls and other things from the wrecks that he knew he wouldn't need to do another day's work when he came out of prison." "But why weren't the stolen goods taken from him?" said Julian. "He'd hidden them," said the old man. "Not even Nosy, his son, nor Bart, his nephew, knew where he'd put them. They were sure he'd got everything hidden in one of the caves in the cliff, but search as they might, they never found the treasure. They went to prison too, but they came out long afore old One-Ear Bill was due out, and how they hunted for the gold and silver, and all that One-Ear had hidden away." "Did One-Ear Bill get it when he came out of prison?" asked Dick. "He never did come out," said Jeremiah, puffing out a cloud of smoke. "He died in prison." "Well, what happened to the treasure then?" asked George. "Who found it?" "No one," said the old man. "It's still there, hidden wherever that old rascal put it. His secret went with him. Bart looked for it, and Nosy too. I've seen 'em in those caves day after day, and with a lantern night after night, but they never found even a pearl necklace. They're dead and gone now, but there's relatives of theirs still living in Demon's Rocks who could do with a bit of that treasure." "Doesn't anyone even have an idea where the loot from the wrecked ships is?" asked Julian. "What about the cave we've been hearing about, the Wreckers' Cave?" "Oh, aye, we've a Wreckers' Cave all right," said the old man, knocking out his pipe, "and I reckon about 5,000 people have been in it, scouting round, looking into holes and corners, hoping to find what Bart and Nosy never did find. I don't mind telling you, I've been there myself, but not a smell of a little gold coin did I ever see. I'll take you there myself some day if you like, but mind, don't you hope to find anything. It's my belief that One-Ear Bill never did hide that treasure there. He just said it was there to fool Nosy and Bart." "We'd love to go and see the cave," said Dick, and George nodded her head in delight. "All right, young sir," said Jeremiah. "You come and tell me when you're ready. I'm sitting here most days, and if you've a nice bit of baccy you don't have no use for, you think of me, see?" "We'll go and buy you some straight away," said Julian. "What tobacco do you smoke?" "Oh, you tell Tom, the tobacconist, it's for old Jeremiah. He'll give you what I like," said the old man. "Right," said Julian with a smile. "And mind now," added Jeremiah, "don't you go snooping round them old caves by yourself. You might get lost." The five went off, Timmy glad to be on the move again. "Where shall we go for our walk?" said George as they wandered through the village. "Oh, look! There's a tiny little shop with Tom the tobacconist written over the door. Let's get the tobacco while we remember." So in went Julian and rapped on the counter. A very small man appeared like a hobgoblin out of the dark corner. "I want some tobacco for Jeremiah Boogle, please," said Julian. "I think you know the kind he likes." "I do that," said Tom, scrabbling about on a shelf. "The amount that old Jeremiah has smoked since I've been here would keep a bonfire going for years. There you are, young sir." "He tells a fine story," said Julian, putting down the money for the tobacco. Tom laughed. "He's been going on about Bart and Nosy and all them old folk, I suppose," he said. "Yes, he has," said Julian. "He's a queer one, is old Jeremiah," said Tom. "Never forgets a thing, even if it happened 80 or more years ago. Never forgives either. There's two folk in this village that he spits at when he passes them by." "What have they done to earn his spite?" asked Dick in surprise. "Well, they be some kin of his old enemy, One-Ear Bill," said Tom. "I reckon he told you about him all right, didn't he?" "Yes, he did," said Julian. "But all that business about the wrecking happened years and years ago. Surely Jeremiah doesn't visit his anger on any descendants of the wicked One-Ear Bill." "Oh, but he do," said Tom. "You see, these two fellows have the job of showing people round the caves here, especially the Wreckers' Caves, and I reckon old Jeremiah still broods about One-Ear's hidden treasure, and is scared in case these two chaps ever find it." "Find it? It's nigh on 70 years since all that happened. No one will come across any treasure now." "But surely they might," said George. "It depends where it was hidden. If it was in some dry, watertight place, it should still be all right. After all, gold and silver don't decay, do they? Wherever it was hidden, it must still be there." "That's what all you visitors say," said Tom, "and that's what Ebenezer and Jacob say. They're the two chaps who show people round the caves. But you won't find any treasure. I reckon the sea took that years ago. Good day to you. I'll give Jeremiah the baccy when he calls in." "I think probably old Tom is right," said Dick, as soon as they were outside the shop. "The reason why the treasure was never found is because it was probably hidden where the sea managed to get at it, in some water-hole or somewhere like that." "I still believe it's somewhere safe," said George. Dick laughed. "All right, we'll give you a chance to hunt for the treasure. We'll visit the Wrecker's Cave as soon as we can. Let's go up on the cliffs for our walk and see if we can spot where the first old lamp used to be that warned ships to swing out to sea and avoid Demon's Rocks. It was a lovely walk along the cliffs. The breeze blew strongly, and Mischief held tightly to Tinker's right ear, afraid of being blown off his shoulder. They came to the flag-post set high on the cliff, its great red flag waving vigorously in the breeze. A notice board was beside it. George read it. This flag warns ships off Demon's Rocks by day. By night the great lighthouse at High Cliffs, farther along the coast, gives warning. In the old days a lamp shone from this spot to give the ships warning, and later a small lighthouse was built out on Demon's Rocks. It is still in existence, but is no longer in use. You can quite well see, said Tinker, that if the wreckers took the lamp from its warning place here and put it much farther back, along the way we've come, the ships would swing too far inland and find themselves wrecked. Well, we'd better go back, said Julian, looking at his watch. We've some shopping to do, remember. Better buck up, too. It looks like rain all of a sudden. They bought fresh bread, more butter and eggs, 2 bottles of milk, some fruit, and a few other things, and then off they went to the little jetty. They made their way over the rocks, jumping over little pools here and there, and avoiding the slimy strands of seaweed that in places covered the rocks. The lighthouse seemed very tall as they came up to it. "It's tiny compared to the great new one away at High Cliff," said Tinker. "You ought to go over that. Its light is so powerful that ships can see it for miles." "Well, this little lighthouse looks nice enough to me at the moment," said Dick, climbing up the stone steps to the strong wooden door. "Hello, look! 2 bottles of milk on the top step. Don't tell me the milkman's been." "He used to call when my father and I were here," said Tinker, "only when the tide was out in the morning, though, because he hasn't a boat. I suppose he heard we were all staying here, and came to see if we wanted milk, and left 2 bottles when he found we were out. He probably yelled through the letterbox, and when we didn't answer, he just left the milk on chance." "Sensible fellow," said Dick. "Get out your key, Tinker, and unlock the door." "I don't remember locking it behind us when we went out this morning," said Tinker, feeling frantically in all his pockets. "I must have left it in the lock on the inside of the door. Let's see now. We locked the door last night and left the key in the lock, so I must have unlocked it this morning for all of us to go out." "That's right," said Julian, "but after you unlocked it, you ran straight down the steps with George, and the rest of us followed. Anne was last. Did you lock the door after you, Anne?" "No, I never thought of it," said Anne. "Well, if we push the door it should open," said Julian with a grin, "and the key will be on the inside waiting for us. Let's go in." He pushed hard, and sure enough the door swung open. He put his hand round to the inside lock to feel for the key. It wasn't there. He looked at the others, frowning. "Someone's been here, and found the door unlocked, taken the key, and probably plenty of other things as well," he said. "We'd better go and look. Come on." "Wait, there's something on the doormat," said Dick, picking up a letter. "The postman has visited the lighthouse too. Here's a letter forwarded from Kiran, so at least 2 people came while we were out. But surely neither of them would take the key, or anything else either." "Well, we'll soon see," said Julian grimly, and up the first bend of the spiral stairway he went, at top speed. With Dick close behind, he went into each room of the lighthouse, racing up the spiral stairway from one to the other. Why, oh why hadn't they watched to see that Tinker had locked the door and taken the key? Yes, a few things had been taken. "My rug," said George. "That's gone." "And my purse," said Anne. "I left it here on the table. That's been taken too." "So has my little travelling clock," groaned Julian. "There were a few other things gone, all small." "I think we'll have to go to the police," said Julian. "I'll take the boat and slip across to the village. The tide will be in and I shan't be able to walk over the rocks." Julian took the boat and rowed across to the jetty. He went straight to the police station, where a stolid-looking policeman listened to him and wrote slowly in a book. "Have you any idea who the thief might be?" he asked, "or if anyone came to the lighthouse while you were out?" "Well, 2 people seem to have come," said Julian. "The milkman and the postman. I don't know of anyone else." "Well, as far as I can tell you, Willie the milkman and Posty are as honest as the day is long," said the policeman. "There may have been a 3rd visitor, one who didn't leave milk or letters." I'll see if anyone was on the quay this morning and saw the thief going over the Demon's Rocks. I'll let you know if I hear anything. And by the way, as you can't lock that lighthouse door now, and it's plain there are thieves about, I shouldn't leave the lighthouse empty." "Yes, I'd already thought of that," said Julian. "I can jam the door all right with something when we're in the lighthouse, but I can't do that when we're out, can I?" "Well, it looks as if we're in for a wet spell," said the policeman, "so maybe it won't be much hardship to keep indoors. Hope you're comfortable in the lighthouse." "Oh, we're very comfortable, Constable," said Julian, smiling. "Why not pay us a call sometime and see us?" Five Go to Demon's Rocks, Part 3. The constable was right in forecasting a wet spell. It poured all that afternoon, and the little company in the lighthouse whiled away the time playing cards. Julian and Dick had managed to find a heavy piece of wood in the storeroom to jam the door from the inside. They all felt much safer when they knew that had been done. Now no one could get in without making a terrific noise. "I'm stiff," said George at last. "I want to stretch my legs. I've a good mind to run up and down the stairway half a dozen times. How far down does the lighthouse go, Tinker? We always scoot up the first bit of the spiral stairway and never think about the lighthouse foundations deep down in the rock. Are they deep down?" "Oh, they are," said Tinker, looking up from his book. "My father told me that when the lighthouse was built, they drilled right down into the rock for a long way, made a kind of shaft. He found an old map somewhere, a sort of plan made when the lighthouse was first built. It showed all the rooms in the lighthouse connected by the spiral stairway, and it showed the big lamp room at the top, and at the bottom of the map the foundation shaft was drawn in." "Can you go down the shaft?" asked Dick. "Is there a ladder or anything?" "I don't know," said Tinker. "I've never been down there." "Do you know where the old map is?" asked Julian. "I think it's in the lamp room," said Tinker. "I remember father taking it up there because it had a drawing of how the lamp worked." "I'd rather like to go and see if we can find it," said Julian. The two of them went up the spiral stairway to the lamp room at the very top of the tower. Tinker scrabbled about in a little dark space under the lamp. At last he brought up a roll of something white and waved it at Julian. "Here it is," he said. Julian took the map down to the others, and they spread it out. "Here are the foundations," said Julian. "My word, they go down a long way into the rock." "Tinker," said Anne, "can anyone get down into this foundation place?" "I told you I don't know," said Tinker. "Anyway, I should think it would be a horrible place down there, dark and smelly and narrow and—" "Let's go and see," said George, getting up. "Let's trot down and find out what's down that shaft." They all ran down the stairway and soon came to the bottom, opposite the entrance of the lighthouse. Tinker showed them a large round trapdoor in the floor there. "If we open that, we'll be looking down into the foundation shaft," he said. So they pulled up the trapdoor and gazed downwards. They could see nothing at all except darkness. Julian shone his torch down the shaft, and they saw an iron ladder going down it on one side. He climbed down a few steps and examined the walls of the shaft. "There's cement," he called, "and they must be enormously thick, I should think. I'm going on down." So down he went, marvelling at the sturdy cement lining of the enormous shaft. He came almost to the bottom, but he didn't go down the last steps of the iron ladder. A peculiar noise came from below, a gurgling, choking noise. He shone his torch down to see, and then stared in amazement. There was water at the bottom of the shaft, water that swirled and moved around, making a strange, hollow, gurgling noise. As he watched, it disappeared. Then it came back again. He shone his torch here and there to find out how the water made its way into the shaft. There must be a tunnel or a passage of some sort there that the sea can enter, he thought. It's high tide now, so the water is swirling in. I wonder if it's free of water when the tide is out. And if so, where does that tunnel, or whatever it is, lead to? He climbed back, glad to be out of the smelly darkness of the old shaft. The others were at the top, looking down rather anxiously. "Here he is," said George. "See anything interesting, Julian?" "Yes," said Julian, climbing out of the shaft. "Got that old map with you? I want to look at something." "Come upstairs then," said Dick. "We can see better up there." As soon as they got to the living room, Julian sat down to look at the map. He ran his finger down the shaft to the bottom, and then jabbed at a round mark drawn there. "See that?" he said. "That's a hole at the bottom of the shaft through which sea water is coming. It's high tide now, so the water is seeping into the shaft, but it's only about a foot deep. At low tide there wouldn't be a single drop coming in. Wouldn't I love to know where that tunnel went to?" "An undersea tunnel," said George, her eyes bright. "Why don't we explore it sometime when the tide is out?" "Well, we'd have to be pretty certain we wouldn't suddenly be drowned," said Julian, rolling up the map. "Very interesting, isn't it? I suppose the hole was left in case the constant push of water there when the tide was in might undermine the foundation. Better to have the shaft half full of water than eaten away by constant tides." "Well," began Anne, and then suddenly stopped in fright. A stentorian voice came up the stairway and made everyone jump violently. "Hey! Anyone at home?" Julian went to the door of the living room and yelled down the stairway. "Who is it? What do you want?" "It's the police," shouted back the enormous voice. "Oh, come on up then," said Julian. Footsteps could be heard coming up the iron stairway, accompanied by loud puffs and pants. Then a policeman's helmet appeared, followed by his shoulders and the rest of him. Soon he was standing in the living room, beaming round at the surprised company, panting with the effort of climbing so many stairs. "How did you get in?" asked George. "We jammed the door shut from the inside." "Well, I managed to unjam it, miss," said the policeman, mopping his forehead. He was the same policeman that Julian had seen that afternoon. "Not much protection that, really. You ought to get a new key made." "How did you get over here? The tide's in," said Julian. "I got Jem Hardy's boat," said the policeman. "By the way, my name's Sharp, Police Constable Sharp." "Very good name for a policeman," said Julian, with a cheerful grin. "Well, have you caught the thief who took our key and the other things?" "No, sir, but I've a pretty good idea who it is," said Sharp. "By chance, I found a lady whose windows look down on the jetty, and she happened to see someone standing about there. She said he went over the rocks to the lighthouse." "Who was it?" asked Julian. "One of a family with rather a bad name," said Sharp. "A man called Jacob Loomer. He comes from the family that used to do a bit of wrecking and—" "Wrecking?" cried Dick. "Old Jeremiah was telling us of long-ago wreckers. One was called Nosey, and another was called Bart, relations of a well-known wrecker called One-Ear Bill," said the policeman. "Ah, yes, One-Ear Bill. He lived a long time ago when old Jeremiah was a young man. This here Jacob, the one that was seen going into your lighthouse today, would be his great-great-great-grandson, I reckon. If you'll come along with me and identify your things, maybe I can do something about it." "I'll come with you right away," said Julian. Julian and the constable went straight to Jacob's house, and there, sure enough, were the things he had stolen, the rug, the clock, and Anne's purse, now empty. "And what about the key?" demanded the constable. "You took the key out of the door of the lighthouse. We know you did. Give it here, Jacob." "I didn't take it," said Jacob sullenly. "I'll have to take you in, you know, Jacob," said the constable. "You'll be searched at the police station. Better give up the key now." "Search me all you like," said Jacob. "You won't find that key on me, I tell you. I didn't take it." "All right, Jacob," said the constable. "If you won't let this young gentleman have his key, I'll have you searched at the station. Come along with me." But alas, no key was found on the surly Jacob, and the constable shrugged his shoulders and raised his eyebrows at Julian. "If you take my advice, you'll get a different lock put on your door," he said. "Jacob's got your key somewhere. He'll be at the lighthouse again as soon as he sees you all go out. We'll have his house searched. The odds are that he's hidden that key somewhere on the premises." Julian went back to the lighthouse, rather worried. It might take a few days in a little place like this to have a new lock put in. In the meantime, they would either have to keep themselves prisoners in the lighthouse, or leave a front door that anyone could open. The others listened excitedly to his tale. They were glad to have their things back, though Anne was sad that all her money had gone. "I vote we go and find old Jeremiah tomorrow and see if he's heard of the robbery and if he has anything interesting to say about it," said George. "And also, we really must get him to show us the Wreckers' Cave," said Julian. "By the way, what were the names of the two men who have the job of showing the visitors round the caves? I'm pretty sure one of them was Jacob." "You're right, it was. And the other man was called Ebenezer," said Dick. "Well, let's hope Jacob is locked up or out of the way somewhere when we go to see the caves. If he isn't, we shall get some black looks from him." "We'll go to the caves tomorrow morning when the tide will be more or less out," said Julian, "and I'd better see if I can find a locksmith here who can give us a new lock and key quickly." "Why not slip out now?" said Dick. "I'll come with you for a bit of fresh air." The locksmith promised to come and look at the door in the next day or two. "Can't leave my shop just now," he said. "It'll take me a few days to do the job for you, I'm afraid." They rowed back to the lighthouse, shut and jammed the door as best they could, and went up to the girls. "No lock or key for a few days," said Dick. "I did want to go and see the caves tomorrow, especially the famous Wreckers one, but we can't possibly leave the lighthouse empty." "Oof!" said Timmy at once. "He says why not leave him behind and let him guard it," said George. They all laughed. Dick patted Timmy and ruffled the fur behind his ears. "Dear old Tim. All right, you guard the lighthouse." "That's settled then," said Julian. "We leave Timmy here on guard, and we all go off to the caves." As soon as they had finished breakfast the next morning, they got ready to go out. "On guard now, Timmy," said George. "The lighthouse is in your charge. Don't let anyone in. You'd better lie on the mat just inside the entrance." Timmy ran slowly down behind Julian and the others. George gave him a pat on the head. "We'll take you out again soon," she said, "and then one of us will stay on guard." Timmy lay down on the mat and put his head on his paws, his big brown eyes looking up at George. They shut the door and went down the lighthouse steps. The tide was still out far enough for them to be able to wade over the rocks to the jetty. They went for a stroll along the front, and who should be there, sitting on a stone seat, but old Jeremiah Bogle, smoking his long pipe and staring solemnly out to sea. "Morning, Jeremiah," said Dick. "We thought we'd go and see the caves today, especially the old Wreckers' Cave." "Now don't you let that Ebenezer take you round," said the old man. "You won't find Jacob there. I know what's happened to him, and serve him right. Never could keep his fingers to himself, that one. And Ebenezer's as bad. Now look, what about me showing you the caves? I know them inside out, and I can show you things Ebenezer doesn't even know of." "Well, we'd certainly much rather you took us and not Ebenezer," said Julian. "Ebenezer may be feeling rather angry because we told the police about his brother stealing things." "Let's go now," said Jeremiah, getting up very spryly. "This way." Off they all went. Mischief, too. The little monkey did Jeremiah the honour of sitting on his shoulder all the way down the village street. He took them round the foot of some very high cliffs. They came to a rocky beach farther along and walked over it. "There's the entrance," said the old man, pointing to a large hole in the cliff nearby. "Got a torch?" "Yes, we brought one each," said Julian, patting his pocket. The hole in the cliff led to the first cave, which was a big one. Lighted lanterns hung here and there, but gave very little light. "Mind your step now," warned Jeremiah. "It's real slippery in places. This way, through this old arch." It was cold and damp in the cave, and the children had to go carefully and avoid the puddles left by the sea. Then suddenly Jeremiah turned a corner and went in a completely different direction. Down and down and down they went. "Hey, we're going towards the sea now, surely," said Julian in surprise. "Do the caves go under the sea, then?" "That's right," said Jeremiah. "This is a real rocky coast. and the way we're taking leads down tunnel, under the rocks, and then into the caves deep underground. See the rocky roof over your heads? Well, if you listen, you can hear the sea mumbling and grumbling over it. The roof is the bed of the sea." That was a very strange thought indeed, and rather alarming. Mischief didn't like this cold, dark, strange walk underground, and had begun to make harsh, frightened noises. Suddenly he gave a very loud screech. "Goodness," said Anne. "Listen to the monkey's screech echoing all along the tunnel and back. Sounds like 100 monkeys chattering at once." Mischief was most alarmed to hear the enormous amount of screeches and chattering noises that now filled the tunnel. He began to cry almost like a baby and clung to Tinker as if he would never let him go. "I expect he thinks this place is absolutely full of screeching monkeys," said Anne. "It's only the echo, Mischief." "He'll soon get used to it," said Tinker, hugging the monkey close to him. "You want to hear the echo just round the next bend of the tunnel," said Jeremiah, stroking the little monkey. And then he very foolishly gave an enormous yell just as they got there. The yell came back 10 times as loud, and the tunnel seemed suddenly full of shouts tumbling over one another. Everyone jumped violently, and Mischief leapt high in the air in terror. He sprang to the ground and scampered away at top speed, wailing in his little monkey voice. He tore down the tunnel, tail in the air, and disappeared round the corner. Tinker was very upset. "Mischief, come back," he yelled. "You'll get lost." "Don't worry about your monkey," said Jeremiah comfortingly. "I've had score of monkeys in my time, and they always come back." "Well, I'll jolly well stay down here till Mischief does come back," said Tinker in rather a shaky voice. They came out into a cave. This too was lighted by lanterns, though very poorly. They had all heard the murmur of voices as they came to it, and wondered who was there. 3 other visitors were in the cave, sightseeing like the children. A big burly fellow was with them, with jet-black hair, deep-set dark eyes, and a surly mouth. So like Jacob that Julian guessed at once that he was the brother, Ebenezer. As soon as Ebenezer set eyes on Jeremiah, he roared in fury. "You get out! This is my job. I'll show the caves to these youngsters." And with that, such a battle of words followed that the 5 were almost deafened, especially as the echo repeated everything very loudly indeed. The 3 visitors fled away up the tunnel, fearing a fight. Ebenezer came shouting up to old Jeremiah, his hand raised. "Haven't I told you more than 100 times to keep out of these caves? Haven't I told you I'm the one to show folks around, and Jacob too?" "Don't take no notice of him," said Jeremiah, turning his back on the angry man. "He's naught but a big mouth, same as his brother." "Look out!" yelled Julian, as the angry Ebenezer rushed at Jeremiah, his fist raised to strike him. Jeremiah saw the angry man coming at him, and very neatly sidestepped. Ebenezer couldn't stop, stepped heavily on a strand of very slippery seaweed, and went sprawling into a corner. "Very nice, Ebenezer," said Jeremiah, delighted. "Get up and run at me again." "He'd better not," said Julian, in his most grown-up voice. "I shall report him to the police if he does, and that will make a pair of them in 2 days." Ebenezer got up, scowling, and glared at Jeremiah, who grinned back in delight. "Coming at me again, Ebby," he said. "It's grand fun to hit an old man, isn't it?" But Ebenezer was very much afraid that Julian would do just what he had threatened and report him to the police. He rubbed his shoulder where it had struck a piece of rock. "Come along," said Jeremiah to the 5 watching children. "I'll take you to the wrecker's cave. Ebby can come too, if so be he can behave himself." That was enough for Ebby. He determined to follow the little company, so he tailed them and shouted at them from a safe distance. "Don't take any notice of him," said Julian. "Lead on, Jeremiah. My word, isn't it dark in this tunnel? Good thing we all brought torches." The tunnel came to an end at last, and opened out into an extraordinary cave. The roof was unexpectedly high, and the irregular sides were ridged with shelves of rock. "Is this really where the old wreckers hid the things they salvaged from the wrecks they caused?" asked Dick. "Oh, this is their cave all right," said Jeremiah, "but I know the caves further on. Ebby doesn't. He's too scared to go further under the sea." "Oh, do take us further," said Julian eagerly, "if it isn't dangerous." "Well, I'm going further on anyway," said Tinker. "Mischief hasn't come back, so he must be lost, and I'm going to find him." Julian saw that Tinker was quite determined. "Right," he said. We'll come with you. Jeremiah, lead the way. It's not really dangerous, is it? I mean, we don't want to find the sea sweeping through these caves right up to where we are." "Tide's not on the turn yet," said Jeremiah. "We're all right for a while. When it comes in, it swirls up this passage here, but it stops at the Wrecker's Cave. That's just too high for it, see? The tunnel runs downwards fast now. It goes right under your lighthouse. Have you seen it down at the bottom of the shaft?" "Good gracious, yes," said Julian, remembering. "I went down it, and the sea was swirling in and out at openings in the bottom of the shaft. Do you mean to say that the sea that rises in the shaft at high tide comes racing up into these tunnels too?" "Aye, that it does," said Jeremiah. "You can get from here to the lighthouse under the rocky sea bed, right to that foundation shaft, but nobody dares. Tide comes in so quickly you might get caught and drowned." He led them further on under the rocky bed of the sea. It was strange and rather frightening to hear the constant noise of the water racing over the roof of the winding tunnel. Then, as they rounded another corner of the tunnel and saw yet another cave, Tinker gave a yell that echoed everywhere. "Mischief! Look, there he is! Mischief!" And sure enough, there was the little monkey, crouched under a small shelf of rock, shivering in fright. He wouldn't even go running to Tinker. Tinker had to pick him up and hug him. "Poor Mischief, were you very frightened?" he said. "You shouldn't have run away. You might have been lost forever." Mischief had something clenched in his tiny paw. He chattered to Tinker and put his little furry arms round his neck. As he did so, he opened one paw, and something fell out and rolled over the rocky floor. "What have you dropped, Mischief?" said Dick, and shone his torch down onto the floor of the cave. Something was glittering there, something round and yellow. Everyone stared, and a shock of excitement went through Julian, who was nearest. "A gold coin!" he cried, and picked it up, "as bright as when it was minted. Mischief, where did you get it?" Immediately everyone was full of the greatest excitement, one thought only in their heads. The treasure! Mischief must have found the treasure. It was an old coin, very old. Where could Mischief have found it? "Let's go farther on and see," cried Dick. "It must be the treasure. Mischief will lead us to it." But Mischief would do nothing of the sort. He was not going to lose himself again. He was going to sit on Tinker's shoulders with an arm safely round the boy's neck. Jeremiah would not go any farther either. He shook his head. "No, not today, young sirs. Tide will be sweeping up these tunnels faster than we can walk. Better turn back now in case we're caught. Many's the visitor that's had to run for his life when the tide comes up all of a sudden. Hallo, where's Ebenezer gone?" "He must have heard us talking about Mischief's gold piece," said George. "I forgot all about him. Now he knows that Mischief has found a gold coin, he'll feel sure that the treasure may be somewhere down here, and he'll look for it as soon as he ever can. Why didn't we keep quiet about it?" Old Jeremiah was as excited as the others, but he said very little. He was angry to think that Ebenezer should have been there to see the find. He didn't trust that Ebby, nor that Jacob either. They'd be ferreting after that treasure as sure as nuts were nuts. Wouldn't they like to know where it was? He stumped on, up the old tunnels, thinking hard, and at last they came out into the welcome daylight again. The sun had gone now, and the wind had whipped up. It was raining hard. "I say, we'd better buck up, else we shan't be able to walk back to the lighthouse over the rocks," said Julian. But fortunately the wind was against the tide, and they just had time to wade over to the lighthouse steps. "I can hear old Timmy barking," said Tinker. "He's heard us coming." So he had. He had been lying on the doormat, his ears glued to the crack under the door. "We're back, Timmy!" yelled George, and she pushed at the door. It opened, and Timmy leapt out, almost knocking her over. Mischief sprang onto the dog's back and chattered at him without stopping. "He's telling him about the gold coin he found," said Tinker with a laugh. "It feels as if we'd been away for ages," said George. "I'm hungry. Let's have something to eat." So, over biscuits and sandwiches and coffee, they talked and talked. "We must get down to the caves again as soon as possible," said George. "I'm absolutely certain that Jacob and Ebby will be down there hunting for coins as soon as the tide's out again." "We can't do anything today, that's certain," said Dick. "For one thing, the tide's in now, and for another, it's blowing up for a storm. Just hark at that wind." "I suppose it would be treasure trove if we found it," said Julian. "I mean, it would be so old it would belong to the crown and not to anyone in particular." I expect we'd be allowed to keep a few coins ourselves, said George. If only we could go straight away now and hunt in that tunnel. I feel as if I can't wait. I say, listen to the sea crashing over the rocks between us and the jetty, said Julian. The wind must be working up to a gale. Well, bad weather's been forecast for some time, said Dick. It'll be jolly difficult rowing to and fro in that little bob-about boat. I doubt if we'd be able to walk across the rocks even at low tide, with a big sea running before the wind. I'm sure this storm will soon blow over, said Julian. We'll be able to pop out tomorrow. But the storm grew fiercer, and the sky became so dark that Anne lighted the lamps. Rain slashed against the lighthouse, and the wind made a loud, howling noise that made Timmy growl deep down in his throat. Anne went to look out of the window. She felt frightened when she saw the great waves that came surging over the rocks below. The sea was grey now, not blue, and it raced along towards the shore, great waves curling over into white mains, spray flying. Out to the sea there were angry waves too, topped with white, which turned into spray as the strong wind caught them. You know, I think it would be quite easy to find the treasure, said Dick. Mischief is a very clever little thing. I'm sure he would remember where he found that coin and lead us straight to the place. It might just have been an odd coin dropped by the man who hid the hoard, said Anne. It might. But wherever it was found, I think we can safely say that the main hoard wouldn't be very far away, said Dick. Well, if we do go hunting, we'll have to go when the tide is well out, said Julian. I don't really fancy scrabbling about in those caves and tunnels under the rocky seabed, when I know that somehow or another, when the tide is coming in, the water gets under the seabed as well as on it. Dick sat frowning, thinking out something. Julian, he said at last, you remember the direction we went in as soon as we were underground this morning? We went leftish all the way, didn't we? Yes, we did, said Tinker. I had my little compass with me, and we went sharp west all the time. Towards the lighthouse that would be, said Julian, and he drew a quick plan. See, here's the lighthouse, and just here is the entrance into the cliff where we first went. Here's the path we took, curving right back to the sea again under the rocky beach. And there's a cave, see? Then more tunnel and caves, the way always curving sharply to the left. A bit farther on and we'd have been almost under the lighthouse, said Dick in amazement. That's right, said Julian, and maybe in the old days, before this lighthouse was built, there was a tunnel down from one of these lighthouse rocks that joined up with the tunnel we were in this morning. Then the wreckers would find it very easy to stow away anything valuable they found in a wrecked ship without being seen, said Dick. You mean they waited till the ship smashed up, said George, then waded over the rocks as we do, took what they could find, and disappeared down a tunnel there to hide it. And came out the other end, said Anne. George stared at Julian, and her eyes were bright. Maybe the tunnel is still somewhere in these rocks, she said, somewhere down at the edge of them, because we know the sea gets into the tunnel. Julian, let's look for it tomorrow. I think you're right. There may be a hole in the rocks here somewhere that drops down into the tunnel we were in. We'll have a good hunt for it tomorrow, said Julian. And if we find it, said Tinker, we'll drop down and look for the treasure. Part 4. blew itself out that evening, and next day was much calmer. The sky still looked angry, and rain fell now and again, but it was possible to get out of the lighthouse door in the morning and go down the steps onto the rocks. "The wind is still pretty strong," said Dick, "and the storm might blow up again. Just look at that angry sky." They spread out and went cautiously over the great rocks on which the lighthouse was built. At low tide the rocks stood well up out of the sea. The lighthouse was built on the highest part, and seemed to tower over the searchers as they clambered here and there, seeking for any hole that looked as if it might lead down into some tunnel below. "Here's a hole!" called Anne suddenly, and they all clambered over to her in excitement. Julian looked down to where Anne was pointing. "Yes, it does look a likely one," he said. "Big enough to take a man, too. I'll climb down and see." He slid down the hole, holding on to projecting pieces of rock as he went. But before he quite disappeared, he shouted, "I'm afraid it's no good. It's come to a sudden end. I'm standing on firm rock, and though I've felt all round it with my feet, there's no opening here. It's a blind end." He climbed up with difficulty and squeezed out of the hole thankfully. "I wouldn't like to get wedged in here," he said, "especially with the tide coming in." "It's beginning to pour with rain again," said George. "What a disappointment. Let's go into the lighthouse and make some hot coffee." They all went into the lighthouse, and once more Julian jammed the door. "I wish that locksmith would come," he said. "If we go down into the caves, we'll have to leave old Timmy behind on guard again." They all went upstairs, and Anne began to make the coffee. As they were sitting drinking it, Timmy suddenly sprang to his feet with a most blood-curdling growl. Everyone jumped, and Anne spilt her coffee. "Timmy, what's up?" said George in alarm. Timmy was standing with his nose towards the closed door of the room, his hackles rising up on his neck. "There can't be anyone on the stairway," said Julian, going to the door. "The entrance door's jammed shut." Timmy raced out of the door as soon as Julian opened it, and tore down the spiral stairway to the entrance door, growling so ferociously that Anne felt really frightened. Julian ran down and went to the door. It was still well and truly jammed. "Maybe it's just the milkman come with some milk again," he said, and unjammed the door. He took hold of the handle to open it, but the door wouldn't open. Julian pulled and tugged, but it was no use. The door simply would not open. By this time everyone was down beside him. "Let me try," said Dick. "The door must be stuck." But no, he couldn't open it either. Julian looked gravely round at everyone. "I'm afraid, very much afraid, that somebody has locked us in," he said. There was a horrified silence. Then George cried out in anger, "Locked us in? How dare they? Who's done this?" "Well, I think I can guess," said Julian. "It was whoever came and stole our key the other day." "What are we going to do?" said Dick. "We can't get out." "I'm afraid they think we might go looking for the treasure," said Julian, his face grave. "We felt sure that Mischief might remember where he had found the golden coin, and lead us there, and I'm pretty sure they think the same. So this is their way of making sure they have time to find the treasure before we do. Let's go upstairs and talk about it. We'll have to think of some way of getting out of this unexpected difficulty." They went soberly upstairs again and sat down in the living room. "We're in a real fix, Julian," said Dick. "Yes, you're right," said Julian, looking worried. "We can't get out of the lighthouse, that's certain. On the other hand, how can we get help? No telephone. Shouting would never be heard. Can't use our boat. No one would ever know we're prisoners. They've seen us going in and out of the lighthouse, and if we suddenly don't appear any more, they'll simply think we've gone home, and that the lighthouse is empty again." They talked and talked, and finally they felt hungry, so they had a meal, though they felt that they ought to eat sparingly in case their food ran short too quickly. The evening came early, for the sky was very dark again, and the wind got up once more and howled dismally. They played games that evening and tried to laugh and make jokes, but secretly everyone was worried. Suppose that the stormy weather went on, and nobody guessed they were locked in the lighthouse, and the milkman didn't bring any milk, and they ate all their food. There was rather a long silence, during which Timmy sighed heavily, as if he too was worrying. "There is one idea that might work," said Julian at last. "It's been running round in my mind for a while. I'm not sure whether it's possible or not, but we might try it tomorrow if help doesn't come." "What is it?" asked everyone at once. "Well, do you remember that I went down that foundation shaft," said Julian, "and saw the water swirling at the bottom? Now, do you suppose it's at all possible that that shaft was bored down through a natural hole, and the lighthouse builders chose to put the foundation shaft there because there was a ready-made shaft they could use, a fine hole going right down through the rock? And they made the hole into a cement-lined shaft, strong and everlasting, so that the lighthouse would never be at the mercy of the waves and wind, but would stand firm whatever happened." This was a new idea to everyone, and it took a little while to sink in. Then Dick smacked the tabletop and made them all jump. "Julian, you've got it! That shaft runs down a natural hole, and that hole must be the one we've been looking for, the one that connects up with the tunnels we were in this morning. No wonder we couldn't find it when we hunted all over the rocks. The shaft makers used it." Julian looked round the table and smiled. "If that is the hole we're looking for, what about one of us going down that iron ladder again to the bottom and finding out if it does lead into the tunnel we were in today, and walking through it and up the passage and coming out through the cliff entrance we used this morning?" said George. "What an absolutely wonderful idea!" In the morning the storm was still about, and the wind was terrific. They had rather a sparse breakfast and were very silent. Anne cleared away and washed up, and then Julian called them all together. "Now, we must decide about this descent down the shaft to what we hope will be the tunnel we were in yesterday," he said. "I'm going down myself." "What about us both going?" said Dick, "just in case the other gets into trouble and needs help." "Not a bad idea," said Julian. "All right, Dick and I will go down the shaft, and the sooner the better. We simply must go while the tide is out. What about now, Dick?" Solemnly they all went down the spiral stairway to the entrance door where the trap was that opened onto the great shaft. Julian pulled up the lid and gazed down into blackness. He shone his torch down, but he could not see the bottom. "Well, here goes," he said, and lowered himself down into the shaft, his feet seeking the rungs of the iron ladder. After him went Dick. The girls shone their own torches down the shaft, but soon the boys were so far down that they could not be seen. Only their voices came up now and again, sounding very hollow and peculiar. "We're at the bottom," shouted Julian at last. "It's rock, and there's no water at present. We've a clear way to follow. I've crawled out of the hole at the bottom, and there's some kind of tunnel here, all right. We're off now, crawling out and into the tunnel. Cheer up, all of you. See you soon." And then the hollow voice stopped, and the girls and Tinker heard nothing more. Julian and Dick were feeling rather pleased with themselves. It hadn't been very difficult to squeeze out of the arches at the bottom of the shaft. Now they were in a dark, narrow tunnel, whose roof sometimes came down so low that they had to bend double. "I shall be glad when we come into a tunnel we recognise," said Julian. "We surely must be near where we were yesterday. Hullo, what's this?" Dick looked to where Julian's torch was shining and gave a shout. "A gold coin! Another one! We must be near where old Mischief ran off to yesterday. Look, there's another and another. Where on earth did they come from?" The boys shone their torches all around, and saw at last where the coins had fallen from. Above their head was a dark hole running up into the rock. As they shone their torches on it, a gold coin slid out and dropped down to join the others. "This is where Mischief found the coin," cried Dick. "Julian, there must be a box or something up there which is rotting away and letting out the money bit by bit." "It must have been pushed right into the recess at the side of the hole," said Julian, "by someone who knew there was a good hiding place there." "Give me a leg up so that I can put my hand in and feel," said Dick. Julian gave him a leg up, and Dick put his head and shoulders into the hole. He felt to one side. Nothing. He felt to the other side, and his hand came across something hard and cold. An iron band, perhaps. He ran his hand over it and touched something soft and crumbly. Old wood rotting away, maybe. Possibly a wooden chest, only held together by the iron bands. He scrabbled about, and Julian gave a sudden shout. "Hey, you've showered me with money! Oh, I never saw so many gold coins in my life." "Julian, I think there's more than one box up there," said Dick, jumping down and looking at the big heap of shining coins at his feet. "There may be a fortune there. Talk about treasure trove. Let's not disturb anything else up that hole. No one knows about it except ourselves. Better gather up these coins, though, just in case that awful Ebby takes it into his head to come down this way." They filled their pockets with the coins and then made their way onwards again. To their joy, they soon recognised one of the tunnels they had been in the day before. "Plain sailing now," said Dick joyfully. "We'll soon be out, and then we'll get the locksmith to pick the lock of the lighthouse so that we can get in." And then, as they turned a dark corner that led into a cave, someone leapt out at them. Julian went down to the ground at once, and Dick followed. He had just time to see that Ebenezer was there with someone else. Was it Jacob? As Dick fell, gold coins spilled out of his pocket. Ebenezer gave a cry and bent down to them at once. Julian tried to take his chance and slip by him, but the other man caught him and sent him spinning backwards. "Where did you find that money?" shouted Ebenezer. "Run, Dick!" panted Julian. "It's our only chance." He gave Ebenezer a terrific shove, which sent him into the other man. Yes, it was Jacob. And then he and Dick were off at once, running as fast as they could, back along the way they had come. They heard Ebenezer and Jacob pounding after them. "Hurry!" panted Dick. "If only we can get to the shaft, we'll be all right." But alas, they took the wrong turning, and soon found themselves in a cave they had never seen before. Ebenezer and Jacob blundered past without seeing them. "Better stay here for a while," said Julian. "Let them get a good way off." So they stayed still and quiet, and then at last ventured out of their hiding place and tried to find their way back to the right path. "If we get lost down here, we're done for," said Julian. "Once the tide flows in, we shall be in a pretty poor way. Somehow we've got to get out through the cliff way or back to the shaft. Hang on to me, Dick. We mustn't get separated whatever happens." They stumbled on, not really knowing whether they were going in the right direction or not. They seemed to go through endless tunnels and caves, and then they heard voices. "That's Ebby's voice, and Jacob's too," whispered Julian. "They're coming this way. Hide here and keep still." So they hid quietly and listened to Ebby and Jacob. "Those boys have got to come back here," said Ebby. "We'll wait. Don't make a sound." "We'll have to make a dash for it," whispered Julian, "and hope for the best. Come on. We'll be caught by the tide if we're not quick." They both made a sudden rush and passed the surprised Ebby and Jacob at a run. Then down the tunnel, beyond them they went as fast as they could, bumping their arms and legs and heads against the rocky walls, but holding their torches steadily in front of them. On they went and on, and behind them, breathing heavily, came Ebby and Jacob. "I think this must be a bad dream," panted Dick. "Julian, look! There's water coming along this tunnel. The tide's coming in." "I feel as if the shaft isn't far away now," said Julian. "I seem to know this tunnel and this cave. Come on! We've got to get to the ladder." "Look! There's the shaft!" yelled Dick at last. "We shall just about be able to squeeze under the arch at the bottom. Hurry, Julian! The water's up to our ankles now." They reached the shaft and squeezed under the small archway that let the water run through from side to side over the rocky bottom. They began to mount the ladder, and then stopped to hear if there were any sounds from Ebby or Jacob. They heard yells. "Ebby! Come back! Tide's flowing in!" And then they heard Ebby's angry voice. "I'm coming! They've gone farther down! They'll be drowned for sure!" Dick grinned. "Come on, Julian, up we go. I can see the light through the trapdoor at the top. The girls have left it open, thank goodness." And soon the two boys were clambering out of the trapdoor, with Timmy barking madly and licking their necks, and the girls and Tinker too excited for words. "What happened? Didn't you get out of the tunnel to find help for us? Were those men there? What happened?" "Plenty," said Julian, "but unfortunately we didn't get past Ebby and Jacob, who were lying in wait for us, so we're still stuck in this lighthouse with nobody to help us. But we did find the treasure. Come on, we'll tell you all about it." And he led the way up the spiral stairway, with Tinker and the excited girls close behind. Soon the boys were telling their story, and George and Anne and Tinker listened and exclaimed and danced about. "My word, it's been an exciting morning," said Julian. "By the way, what's the weather been like? We couldn't see a thing below." "Oh, it's awful again, Julian," said Anne. "There's another storm coming. Look at those scurrying black clouds." "It does look bad," said Julian, his excitement leaving him as he saw clearly that another big storm was blowing up. "We certainly shouldn't be able to get out of here today, even if we could get out of the door." There was silence for a moment, and then Julian said, "I'm blessed if I know what to do for the best. There must be a way out of this. Can't we get a message out somehow? Are there any flags here, Tinker, that we could wave out of the window?" "No," said Tinker, "I've never seen any." Julian was very worried. It really did look as if the stormy weather was going on and on. It might well continue for a few days, and their food certainly wouldn't last long. There were still some tins left, and they had plenty of water, of course. The rain saw to that. But somehow they were all always so hungry. "Cheer up, Julian," said George. "You do look grim." "I feel it," said Julian. "I cannot for the life of me think of any way to escape from here, or even to get help. We've no way of signalling." "Pity the lighthouse lamp is no longer going," said Tinker. "That would have been a fine signal." To Tinker's enormous surprise, Julian suddenly gave a shout, leapt up, came over to Tinker, and gave him such a clap on the back that the surprised boy almost fell off his chair. "What's the matter?" stammered Tinker, rubbing his shoulder. "Don't you see? Perhaps we can get the old lamp going and make it shine out as it used to do, to make people realise that we're prisoners here in the lighthouse," said Julian. "Tinker, do you know if it's possible to light the lamp?" "I think so," said Tinker. "My father showed me how it worked, and I think I remember." "Oh, and there's a bell that can be struck too." "Better and better," said Julian. "Where is the bell?" "It was dismantled and put away," said Tinker. "It used to hang in that sort of veranda place that runs outside round the lamp room. There's a big hook for it there." "Let's get the bell and have a look at it," said Julian. The great bell was down in the storeroom, covered up. It was made of brass, and had once had a hammer that struck it at intervals, worked by some simple machinery, but the machinery was in pieces, no good at all. "We'll take the bell upstairs," said Julian. "Gosh, it's heavy as lead. Dick, I'll need your help." Between them the two boys carried the heavy bell up to the living room, and Tinker brought up the old hammer that used to strike it. "What a wonderful bell," said Julian in awe. "Look how old it is too. See? It says cast in 1896. My word, if only we could get it hung up in its right place in the gallery, the sound of it would go right to the village and beyond. We'll wait till the wind has died down a bit, and then try to hang it. Now, let's look at the lamp. Will it want oil, Tinker?" "It may do, though I think there's some still in it, left when the lighthouse was closed down," said Tinker. "But there's plenty down in the storeroom." "Good," said Julian, feeling decidedly more cheerful. "Now, if the gale dies down at all, we'll try to hang the bell. We can strike that as soon as it's hung, and not wait till we light the lamp." They went up to the lamp room in the afternoon and looked at the great old lamp. Tinker explained how it worked. "It used to go round and round mechanically," he said, "and there were screens here and here that shut out the light in places as it went round, so that the light seemed to go on and off if any ship was watching it. The screens were broken in pieces. There was still some oil in the lamp, but Julian added more. The wick seemed perfectly good." Julian felt in his pocket for matches. As the lamp room was enclosed in glass, it was easy to keep the matches alight. He touched the oily wick with it, and hey presto, the lamp was lighted. It was a very big lamp, and, close to, the light was quite blinding. "Now, to hang the bell," said Julian, and he cautiously opened the door leading on to the gallery outside, having waited until the wind died down for a moment. He and Dick lifted the bell up to the hook there, and slipped the iron loop over it. It hung there swinging, and Julian lifted the hammer, but at that moment a great gust of wind took him, and he staggered, almost falling over the railing. Dick caught him just in time, and with George's help dragged him into the lamp room. They were all very white-faced. "That was a narrow escape," said George, her hands shaking and her body trembling. "We'll have to be careful if we go out on the gallery again. Perhaps we had better rely only on the lamp." "I vote we all go down and have some hot tea," said Julian, thankful for his escape. Everyone soon recovered when they were drinking hot tea and eating ginger biscuits. "I wish it was dark so that we could see how bright the light is from the lamp when it shines," said Dick. "It should be dark very quickly today." And it was. So dark that the light streaming from the old lamp at the top of the lighthouse was brilliant. It cut a shining path through the night, gleaming yellow. And through the roar of the sea went a great clanging as Julian, with Dick holding on to him, struck the old bell hanging in the gallery. Down in the village of Demon's Rocks that night, people drew their curtains, made up their fires, and sat down in their armchairs. They were thankful not to be out in the wind and rain. Old Jeremiah Boogle was lighting his pipe, sitting by his own roaring fire, when he heard a sound that made him drop the flaring match and listen in amazement. Boom! 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 "A bell," said old Jeremiah, standing up, hardly able to believe his ears. "A bell? I've not heard for nigh on 40 years. No, it can't be the old lighthouse bell. That's been gone for many a day." He went to his window and pulled aside the old curtain. He stared out and could not believe his eyes. He gave a yell. "Milly, come and look here! Lighthouse lamp is shining out." "What is it, Grandad?" said a plump little woman bustling in. "Look, Milly, am I seeing right? Ain't that the lighthouse lamp a-shining there?" said Jeremiah. "Well, there's a bright light shining out there high above Demon's Rock," said Milly, "but I never in my life saw the lighthouse lamp shining out before. And what's that booming noise, Grandad? Like a great bell." "That's the old bell in the lighthouse," said Jeremiah. "I couldn't mistake that. Many's the time I heard it booming out to warn ships off the Demon's Rocks in the old days. Milly, it can't be. It don't hang there no more, and the light don't shine no more. What's happening?" "I dunno, Grandad," said Milly, scared. "Ain't no one in the lighthouse, far as I know." Old Jeremiah smacked his hand down on the window-sill, knocking over a plant pot. "There are folk there. 3 boys and 2 girls, and a dog and a monkey as well." "There now," said Milly. "Did they set the lamp a-going and sound that bell? There it goes again, enough to wake all the babies in the village." Milly was right. It did wake all the babies and the children, and amaze every man and woman in the place, including Ebenezer and Jacob. They leapt to their feet when they heard the bell, and were astounded to see the great light shining out steadily in the night. They heard people hurrying by their cottage on their way to Demon's Rock jetty. They heard Jeremiah's big voice booming out too. "It's they children up there in the lighthouse, a-banging that bell and setting that light a-shining. Something's wrong. It's help they're needing, folks. Something's wrong." Ebenezer and Jacob knew quite well what was wrong. The children were locked in the lighthouse and couldn't get out, and now the whole village was aroused, and when the morning came, a boat would bob out on the great waves and find out what had happened. That night, Ebby and Jacob disappeared. It wasn't Constable Sharp they feared, it was the people of the village. They slipped away in the dark and rain and were gone. When daylight came, there were many people on the jetty, ready to go across to the lighthouse. The wind was so rough that great waves still rolled over the rocks on which the lighthouse stood. Soon a boat was launched, and Jeremiah, Constable Sharp, and the village doctor went across, the boat careering from side to side like a mad thing as the waves caught it. They went up the steps to the lighthouse and banged at the door, and from the other side came Julian's voice. "You'll have to break down the door. Ebby and Jacob locked us in and took the key. We can't get out." "Right, stand back," shouted Jeremiah. "Constable and I are going to break in." Jeremiah was old, but he was still hefty, and Constable Sharp was heftier still. The lock suddenly splintered under their enormous shoves, and the door flew wide open. Jeremiah and the policeman shot inside and bumped into Julian and the rest, sending them flying. Timmy barked in astonishment, and Mischief fled up the stairway. Soon they were all in the living room, and Julian was pouring out his story. "We didn't know how to get out of here when we were locked in," he said, coming to the end of his long story. "So, in the end, we lighted the old lamp and hung up the old bell and struck it with the hammer. The lamp didn't burn all night. It went out early this morning." "But both bell and light did their job well, son," said Jeremiah. "And to think that old lamp shone again, and that old bell sounded. I thought I must be dreaming." "We'll be after that Ebenezer and Jacob," said the policeman, shutting his notebook, "and it seems to me you'd best all go home, young sir. This weather's going on for a bit, and there's nothing to keep you here, is there?" "Well," said Julian, "actually there is. You know the old wrecker's lost treasure you told us about, Jeremiah? Well, we've found it." Jeremiah was so astounded, and he couldn't say a word. He goggled at Julian, and opened and shut his mouth like a fish. Julian took some golden coins out of his pocket and showed them to the policeman. "There you are," he said. "We know where there are thousands of these. They're in iron-bound boxes and chests down in one of the tunnels in the rock. We can't leave here till we've given the treasure into the hands of the police." "Just where is this treasure?" said Constable Sharp. "I'd better get it straight away." There was a twinkle in Julian's eye. "Well," he said, "you have to go down the foundation shaft of the lighthouse and crawl under the archway at the bottom, and then make your way down the tunnel. But be careful the sea doesn't catch you. And then, when you come to—" The policeman stopped scribbling down what Julian was saying and looked startled. Julian laughed. "It's all right. Dick and I will fetch it ourselves today. We don't need to go down the shaft. There's another way in, the way you took us, Jeremiah. We'll go this morning, for a last excitement. And then home. Perhaps you would kindly telephone to Kiran Garage for a car to fetch us at 12 o'clock, Constable." "Oh, good," said Anne. "An adventure is always exciting, but I've really had enough at the moment. This was such a bad weather one. Constable, look out. That monkey has pulled out your whistle." So he had, and what is more, he blew it. Jeremiah almost jumped out of his skin, and Mischief received a slap that almost made him jump out of his skin too. "Goodbye, Jeremiah," said Julian. "It's been fine meeting you, and thanks for coming to rescue us. We'll see you again some day. Come along, Constable. We'll go and find the treasure with you now." "I don't think I'll come," said Anne, who didn't really like dark, smelly tunnels. "I'll do the packing." "Timmy and I will help you," said George, who knew that Anne wouldn't like to be left alone in the lighthouse. The boys went off with Jeremiah, the doctor, and Constable Sharp rowing over the rocks to the jetty. The doctor and Jeremiah said goodbye at the jetty, and the three boys and Mischief took Constable Sharp to find the treasure. They had to push their way through quite a crowd of people who had collected on the quay, anxious to know why the light had shone out from the lighthouse in the night, and why the bell had sounded. "Make way, please," said the policeman politely. "Everything is all right. These children were locked in the lighthouse and couldn't get out. There's no need for any excitement." "Well," said Dick, as they made their way down into the caves, "what an adventure! It was just a bit too exciting at times. I shall be quite glad to be back at Kiran Cottage again, with peace and quiet all around us." "Haven't you forgotten something?" said Julian with a grin. "What's that?" asked Dick. "Uncle Quentin and his friend," said Julian. "They'll still be there."